Hey guys, Michael here. We're pushing ahead. Today we are going to talk about one of my favorite topics: international, globalization, international management. In this particular topic, this is topic 8 on As You Learn, we're going to cover various aspects of what it means strategically for companies to go abroad. So, without any further ado, sit back, take out your notebook, take some notes, and let me know if you have any questions. All right. I think I've let it be known that I think going abroad and mixing and learning about different cultures is one of the most amazing things that we can do as human beings. I mean, this is my own personal experience. I've mentioned to students before, my only regret about my international career is that I got started too late. I grew up in a rather poor family. I attended a very small college in a rural part of West Virginia. Didn't have a lot of resources. We didn't have a chance for study abroad. I didn't have a chance to get exposure to different cultures. My first real exposure to different cultures was when I attended graduate school in Connecticut. I happened to go to the University of Connecticut for my master's degree, and it was there that I really began to get exposure to people from all around the world, and I just fell in love with it. Right now, we're at sort of a weird period of history. People are saying that the era of internationalization is over. I don't think so, and I certainly hope not. I certainly hope that internationalization continues, and that I still encourage my students to take advantage of every opportunity that they can to have international exposure. I think COVID, this virus pandemic that we're currently experiencing, and this political turmoil that we're experiencing as well, I'm hoping this is a temporary phenomenon and that we will get back on track and that internationalization will continue at this pace that it has for the past 20, 30 years. Okay, so in this particular lesson, what we are talking about is internationalization in the context of strategic management. So as usual, we have a roadmap, and this is the way that our roadmap is laid out for this particular topic. We're going to identify opportunities for internationalization. We're going to explore resources and capabilities for international strategies. We're going to talk about each of these. We're going to talk about the modes of entry. We're going to do this towards the end of the next lesson. And then we're going to talk about the reasons for internationalization, the outcomes. Hopefully it can help us to have better performance and more innovation. But we'll also talk about some of the management problems and risks along the way. So all of that is what's coming up. 4 primary reasons for going abroad as an organization. 4 different reasons for having an international strategy. 1 is increased market size. 2nd is return on investment. 3 is economies of scale and learning. And 4 is possible advantages to location. Okay? Traditionally, we think of that as low cost, but not necessarily just low cost these days. In fact, in some ways, the U.S. is becoming competitive again in some of these manufacturing industries that we normally thought of as being relegated to emerging economies or developing economies. Here's a classic model of rationale for international expansion. But let me say at the outset that I believe that this is slightly ethnocentric. It's slightly outdated. This is coming at things from a U.S. perspective, or at least from a developed economy perspective. And it makes assumptions about who develops products and then who should produce those products based on what we might call ethnocentric ideas of wealth, of competitiveness, and of costs. And these don't necessarily hold today. But anyway, traditionally, we would expect that a company like the U.S. to develop, Raytheon developed the microwave oven. Yeah, Raytheon was a defense contractor to develop this product. And so the first microwave ovens, I haven't ever seen one in my life, personally, but the first microwave ovens were American made by American companies. Yeah, and they began producing and selling these products, and then they began to saturate this market, and so of course they sold some of those to foreign companies, and then they began to move the production overseas, and then production became standardized, and so now microwave ovens are pretty darn cheap. I mean, you can get a microwave oven for under $100 pretty easily these days, right? And I'd say most of them are made in China, probably made by Korean or Japanese companies, but manufactured in China. I guess a few American companies are still manufacturing some of these appliances, but I doubt it. I'd have to check that up. I don't think any microwave ovens are still made in the U.S. But so this is a historical, traditional view of international expansion. I'm going to ask you to know that, even though it may be slightly outdated. One of the big things that we're going to talk about here is from our old friend Michael Porter. And we've already talked about Michael Porter and a lot of his ideas. We talked about his 5 forces. We talked about his business level strategy, which he sometimes calls generic strategies, or he originally called them generic strategies. Well, this is another of his popular models. If you go to Google and you type Michael Porter and diamond, you're going to get tons and tons, thousands of hits from this model, and it's called the diamond. And the diamond is Michael Porter's attempt at trying to be internationally relevant. Michael Porter happened to be on the right place at the right time. I know Michael Porter is a smart guy, and I don't want to take anything away from him, but I think that he happened to be right at the beginning when strategic management was just starting to lay its foundations. Michael Porter happened to come along with this truckload of ideas that he stole or borrowed from economics, and he applied them to strategic management, and so he is responsible for a lot of the ways that we think about strategy. So, some of the questions that we're going to answer with Michael Porter's diamond. Why is it that some countries are competitive in certain industries? Even countries that we may think of as being not necessarily so developed, we can usually find at least one industry in which they're pretty good at. What are various ways of expanding internationally, and how can we manage our business in different countries? So, Michael Porter points this out. Remember, Michael Porter was trained as an industrial organization economist, an IO economist. So he always brings things back to the industry. This is the vast knowledge that he had. His first PhD was actually in economics. His second PhD was in business. And so he says, why is it that some countries are really good at producing cars? If we look at the nameplates on cars around the world, we see that America is not necessarily the most competitive brand name for cars that's out there. Germany and Japan tend to dominate the world's car markets. Others are leaders in producing computer software. The United States is a leading producer in e-commerce, search engines, for example. And others are leaders in producing shoes. Italy, Italian shoes. It's almost like a cliche, right? So, Michael Porter says it doesn't really make sense to say why is it that some countries are competitive and other countries are not competitive. The U.S. government came to Michael Porter and was interested in increasing competitiveness. He said, that's not the right question, guys. It doesn't really make sense to ask why some countries are competitive and some countries are not competitive. This is a dumb question, and you can't really answer that question in any meaningful way. Instead, it makes a lot more sense to ask, What is it about a nation that creates the environment for its firms to innovate and be dynamic in a particular industry? We've got to look at it industry by industry to industry to really make some progress. And so that's what Michael Porter's diamond is talking about. And then his answer is, it depends on certain attributes that create certain industries, make certain industries to be dynamic. And notice, this doesn't take a big leap of the imagination. These attributes are going to vary from country to country to country. And so some countries might have attributes that really, let's say, make their agricultural sector super competitive. Others might have attributes that make their automobile sector super competitive. And other countries might have attributes that make their fashion industry super competitive. And so it depends on these 4 attributes. The attributes are the factor conditions, the demand conditions, the related and supporting industries, and a firm's strategy, structure, and rivalry. So let's look at these all in the diagram. This is the reason it's called a diamond. Michael Porter happened to put it this way, this particular shape. So just by a fluke of history, we call this the diamond. So if you would go to Google, do it right now. Stop this right now. Go to Google, type in Michael Porter's diamond. See how many hits you come up with. I don't know about you, but I came up with 268,000 hits on Michael Porter's diamond. So again, this is a very popular model by our favorite strategic management guru, Michael Porter, and it lays out the attributes that make a industry competitive in a particular country. Notice here, let me point out something else. Notice here that he's got government not as a 5th attribute. Well, some people have said, maybe government should be an attribute, and maybe they're right, I don't know. But that's not the way that the diagram is drawn. That's not the way that Michael Porter envisioned it. He's envisioning a private production system in which government lays, in the parlance of strategic management, we would say it lays out the foundations, the institutional structure in which these other attributes interact with each other. So let's go through a few examples here. Japan and Germany, if you go around the world, you'll notice that Japan and German automobiles, that nameplate, the Toyotas, the Mercedes, the Volkswagens, they tend to dominate in the automobile industry. When it comes to motorcycles happens to be, again, Harley is big in the United States, but you get outside of the U.S., you don't see people riding Harleys much. It tends to be dominated by Japanese nameplates. Yamaha, Honda, Kawasaki, Suzuki, these are the big ones. Why is that? Well, it just so happens that the attributes in Japan make for an extremely competitive motorcycle industry. Guess who dominates in flowers? 80% of flower exports around the world come from one tiny European country, Holland. Yeah, it's almost like a cliche, right? The Dutch flowers. Why is that? Well, it just so happens that Dutch people are extremely demanding about their flowers. And so this is one of the attributes, that they have wonderful factor conditions for growing flowers. They have in place the related and supporting industries and a firm strategy and structure and rivalry, so that the flower industry tends to be extremely, extremely competitive in Holland. Yeah. And Italians dominate in the fashion industry, as do the French. Teaching abroad, I had students from all around the world. And I don't know about you, but App State students are not the most fashionable in the world, at least in my opinion. If you start going to other countries and you start running into students from other parts of the world, from Italy, for example, or from France, their sense of fashion is much more refined, much more highly developed than American students. This makes for great demand conditions, and it makes fashion a dominant industry in France and Italy. So you can work through these in lots of different things, and you look at a particular industry, and there are lots of examples that are available on the internet for you to do on your own. So let's look at each one of these in what does that mean? Well, factor, it's the positions of factors of production. Since Michael Porter was an economist, he's going to start off with these factors of production. The demand condition, you want customers in your home market to be tough, demanding, very scrutinizing the products so that they can help you to develop, hone your skills. If you can make it where the customers are demanding, then you go to some place where they're less demanding, then it's going to be an easier time for you. Related and supporting industries. Firm strategy, structure, and rivalry. The example that your textbook uses is software industry. Software industry in India. India is a country that most people would not classify as an advanced economy because on many fronts, GDP, indicators of health, indicators of development, it tends to score rather low because it's got a very vast population. But nonetheless, India is still very competitive in the software industry. Yeah. Why is that? Well, let's go through the factors one at a time and see if we can figure out why a country like India, not necessarily an advanced economy, happens to have one of the most competitive software industries in the world. Well, let's start over here with the factor conditions. They have a very large pool of skilled labor and low salaries, high English language capabilities. Some Indian universities are the best in the world, especially in certain types of tech fields, in quantitative and STEM types of fields. This helps them to develop this vast, highly motivated, hard-working labor pool. And if we look at the related and supporting industries, we've got large network of public and private educational institutes, which is necessary. We've got weak but rapidly improving communication infrastructure, duty-free access to imported computers and software. So all of these things make the related and supporting industry very favorable for the Indian software companies industry. I'll get it out here in a minute. Next, domestic rivalry. I'm going to cheat and jump up here. No domestic barriers to entry or startup. 800 firms, mostly small, in fierce rivalry. Growing number of multinational corporations are setting up software development centers in industry. And finally, there's a very symbiotic relationship with the U.S. when it comes to Indian high-tech companies. And if you go to Silicon Valley, if you go to California, in San Francisco, and you go to the Silicon Valley, you'll notice that many of the people working in that industry are of Indian nationality or of Indian ancestry. And this is not a coincidence. It's because of this symbiotic relationship between the United States and India when it comes to tech. So the companies, for example, of Google, of Microsoft, these companies now are run by Indian CEOs. And those guys and gals are throughout that entire industry as part of this symbiotic relationship again. So the demand conditions, a large, growing market, sophisticated customers, cutting-edge applications, all of these things lead to increased competitiveness of the Indian software industry. Paradoxically, the conditions that make it tough for a company to survive in a particular industry actually makes it more likely that the country will dominate this industry in global market. Hey, It's me again. That's all we're going to do for this particular part of this topic. This is topic 8, international management. So until next time, this is Michael saying goodbye.